Alright, this is part 16, the Synagogue of Satan, Footprints in History. I'll just continue with the struggle with rulers and the Pope for authority, and which would also give rise to the republics in Italy, and also with the rise of the banking houses. Frederick II was declared Holy Roman Emperor in 1215 AD, and the next year the Dominican Order of Monks was set up, supposedly to combat heresy, especially in southern France, with the Albigensians. But I find it very odd how the Dominicans and also the Franciscans, who were supposedly ascetic monks who had taken vows of poverty and forsaken wealth and were non-militant, how they increasingly appeared along trade routes and also at trading posts. They were found at posts given to Genoa and Venice on the Black Sea coast, and they had quickly increased their influence as far as China. This was just following an earlier pattern. Other monastic orders before them were found at trading posts and along trade routes, and it seems that the monastic orders were being used as a cover for other purposes. And the monks, or at least their leaders, were often found associating with rulers and commanders. Francis of Assisi went to Egypt in the Fifth Crusade to negotiate a peace at Damietta with the Sultan of Egypt and with the Crusaders. And there is startling evidence that what Francis really offered was that if the Sultan of Egypt allowed for some Catholic influence in the Islamic world south of Byzantium, the Franciscans would cease their activities for Christianity to the east of Byzantium. And this may be why there wasn't much of a conversion of the Turks and the Mongols to Christianity. At this time, Frederick II was trying to increase his control over the papacy, and he was also trying to increase his influence to the east through his kingdom of Sicily, which was at a very important location. And in Languedoc, the Albigensian crusade turned into a bloodbath when several thousand knights from England, France, and Germany slaughtered much of the population. They slaughtered both heretics and Catholics. The locals at the time thought that it was just a land grab, and it appears that it was the French rulers that were taking back lands of the English Plantagenets that they had acquired through marriage. As the Holy Roman Emperor struggled with the papacy for authority, there was a corresponding struggle in northern Italy with the larger cities against the smaller cities and countryside. Two factions arose, the Guelphs and Ghibellines. The Guelph faction was the papacy with the larger cities. The Ghibeline faction was the countryside and smaller cities with the Holy Roman Emperor. The term Guelph is just an Italian corruption of the name Welf, which is the family name of the rulers of Bavaria and Germany. Ghibeline is also a corruption of the name Weibling, which is the name of a castle in Swabia, also in Germany. This was a castle owned by the Stauffen family of Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. The Stauffens had struggled with the Welfs for the throne of the Holy Roman Empire. It's interesting that the large commercial cities mostly supported the papacy, the Guelph faction, and the small cities and the population of the countryside mostly supported the Holy Roman Emperor. The small cities and countryside were more feudal, and there was a larger German population, so they would naturally support the Holy Roman Emperor, who was mostly German. So it seems that the papacy naturally would be in league with the large commercial cities because they would bring in much more wealth. But Venice, which was one of the most powerful cities, actually stood apart from the others, and it wasn't necessarily certain if Venice would support the Pope or the Holy Roman Emperor. And it's a bit curious that even though the city of Venice usually supported the papacy, one of its most powerful families, if not the most powerful, the Este family, actually married into the Welf family of Bavaria. And you might wonder if they were attaching themselves to the Welf family, hoping that the Welfs would once again try to take the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, which they had done before. The family became known as Welf Est, and this was a little known but very influential family through the years later. It's also a bit odd that Venice was the only city allowed by the Pope to trade with Islamic powers, and from its trading posts of Byzantium along the Black Sea coast, it was trading in slaves. Many of these were Slavic people taken by Turks, Mongols, and others, and they would end up, many of them, in Egypt and would be known as the Mamelukes. Venetian merchants would buy slaves with European silver, and they would also buy gold from Turks, Mongols, and others that they had taken in raids from lands as far as China. And they would also get gold from Africa. They began to manipulate the ratio between the value of gold and silver, which actually depleted silver coinage from Europe. Venetian merchants moved some of their operations into Bohemia, where there was a lot of mineral wealth, especially silver. the kingdoms of Europe got most of their silver from Bohemia, and the Venetians began to deplete the silver coinage from Europe and to put the kingdoms on a gold standard. This greatly weakened the kingdoms because they were naturally rich in silver. A large number of people in the countryside were losing their lands as the banks manipulated the money supply, especially in northern Italy, and many of them would move into the cities, increasing the populations there. In 1228, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II led the Sixth Crusade, but he had a falling out with the papacy when he dealt with Muslim powers under his own authority and not that of the papacy. He was able to win back much land of Jerusalem, but he would increasingly come against the papacy more and more all the way till his death. After the Albigensian Crusade came to an end, the papacy issued a Holy Inquisition in 1233, and it appears that the papacy was just trying to raise its approval after the slaughters of Languedoc. In 1250, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II died, and the Pope vowed that no Stauffen would ever again rule as emperor. In the same year, the Islamic powers were shaken when the Mamluks took over Egypt, and in 1258, the Mongols took over Baghdad. They were threatening to take over the whole Middle East, even Egypt, but they were turned back by the Mamluks in Syria in 1260. By this time, the Angevins were on the rise. They were a mixture of French, English, and Norman rulers named for Charles of Anjou. They were acquiring lands along the Dalmatian coast near Venice, and they were competing with Venice for trade routes up into Bohemia, even as far as Hungary and Poland. And the Angevins would marry into many of the native rulers of those countries. In 1261, Michael Palaeologus took back the throne of Byzantium from the so-called Latin kingdoms. Some considered him a usurper at the time, and he may have been partly related to the Norman, French, or English knights that had come with the Latin kingdoms. The Palaeologus dynasty would be very important for years to come, and he also made a very important trade pact with Genoa, raising Genoa's importance and influence for centuries after that. But the Angevins had recently acquired Sicily, which made them a greater threat to Byzantium. This may have caused Michael Palaeologus of Byzantium to make alliances with other ruling houses of France. And in 1282 there was a revolt in Sicily called the Sicilian Vespers, which toppled the Angevin kingdom there. This may have been instigated by Michael Palaeologus, or possibly by the Venetians, who were one of the biggest competitors of the Angevins. In 1290, King Edward I of England formally expelled the Jews from England. There some believe that it was actually the barons and nobility of England that demanded the expulsion, not King Edward himself. And it's believed that it was because the nobles were coming into greater and greater debt to the Jews. It seems that the low interest rates of the Fourth Lateran Council were catching up on the nobility of England. This wouldn't be as much of a problem for King Edward. By this time he was already borrowing from the Venetians and also the Knights Templar like many other kings, and even the papacy. The Knights Templar were becoming bankers with their increasing wealth, and they would no doubt operate banks in northern Italy in the large cities like Venice, Florence, and Genoa. By this time the number of Templars had grown. There were many that had joined the order from Languedoc during the Albigensian Crusade, and many of these were believed to be Cathars, just like the original 9 Knights, and many of those were believed to be formerly Jewish. And also there were many from Britain that had joined the Templars through the Celtic Church when it merged with the Cistercian order. And it appears that not long after King Edward expelled the Jews from England, the Knights Templar retaliated by stirring up the Scots against Edward. William Wallace was believed to be a Knights Templar, and it's believed that he and other Templars helped the Scots at the Battle of Stirling Bridge on September 11th, 1297, when they defeated the English. September 11th is a very important date for Kabbalism, and this also points to the Templars. King Edward surely needed more money to continue his battle with the Scots, and it seems that since the Jews had been expelled from England, that he then began to tax the clergy of England. And like Philippe IV of France, who was taxing the clergy in his kingdom, this brought both kings into conflict with Pope Boniface VIII. Boniface claimed that only the Pope had the authority to tax the church, and in 1302 he issued the papal bull Unam Sanctum. This gave the papacy authority over all kings and any other secular authority. And the papal bull Unam Sanctum also was basically saying that the papacy owned all the world, all the wealth of the world, and all the possessions of the world. King Philip IV only intensified his struggle with Pope Boniface, and it seems that the struggle helped shorten the Pope's life. Then Philip IV appointed his own Pope, the Archbishop of Bordeaux in France. He became Clement V, and then on October 13, 1307, Clement V formally banned the Knights Templar from the Catholic Church. Philip IV also expelled Jews from France along with the Templars, claiming that they were disloyal. It's not certain if he expelled the Order of Zion, which also became known as the Priory of Zion. It seems that the Order of Zion still had plans to take back the actual city of Jerusalem itself. The Templars weren't so concerned with Jerusalem. Whatever the truth is, many of the Templars escaped Philip IV and went into other countries, and they would join other orders like the Teutonic Knights, the Hospitallers, and other orders of Spain and Portugal, Italy. But it appears that most of the Templars went into Scotland and also Switzerland. In Switzerland, they would help the cantons there gain independence from the local rulers, and in Scotland, they eventually helped Robert the Bruce become King of Scotland in 1314 at the Battle of Bannockburn. It's believed that the Templars somehow had advance warning and were able to take much of their wealth out of France, even some of it as far as America, and that before Columbus. And it may be that it was only the lower levels of the Templars that were affected most by Philip IV. But he did get a lot of money by embargoing Italian banks that were no doubt dealing with the Templars. This money was supposed to be going to the papacy, and the kings of France would use much of this money and over the next century to fight battles with the kings of England to take back territories in France. Pope Clement V would be the first in a line of several French popes that were chosen and controlled by the kings of France, and many of these popes, like Clement V, were Cistercians, and since the Templars originally were Cistercians, it appears that Philip IV hadn't completely eradicated the Templars from France. The papacy itself was actually moved to France, to Avignon in the area of Languedoc. So I'll continue in the next part with the transformation of the Templar orders and the further rise of the banking powers, and also with the rise of the Ottoman Turks and the fall of Byzantium. See you then.